Prime Minister Anthony Albanese outlines a Future Made in Australia Act aimed at tying the economy and national security closer together. Woolworths and Coles accused of buying up property to prevent competitors from opening up shop, and track and field athletes to be paid $50,000 for winning a gold medal at the Paris Olympics. Welcome to Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. It is Friday, the 12th of April, 2024. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, after the show, you have an interview coming up with one of our favourites, Dr. Nicola Powell, Head of Research at Domain.
Sure do. We had the news this week that rent levels are pretty much at record highs across the country for houses and for units. So we talked to her about that, why it's happening, but she does have some good news about what's going to happen over the next 12 months or so. She thinks we might be heading towards a turning point. Now, lots of people out there renting and trying to find rental accommodation. It's certainly good news for them. Anyone interested in the housing market or investing, of course, they should be listening as well.
Yeah, and that's what I like about this interview, that it is not all dismal. It is not all bad news. It is very tough at the moment, but as Nicola says, there is a little glimmer of hope there.
Sure is.
And also, good glimmer of hope, Sean, next week, if you sign up today for the newsletter, the new Fear and Greed newsletter, then you can look forward to getting our once a week, could also say weekly, newsletter. It comes out every Wednesday. Head along to fearandgreed.com.au and pop your email address in there, and you get basically the news of the week, the main business stories you need to know. But what I like most is we get your take on those stories as well, which is something that you don't always share in the podcast. What you really think.
Yeah, well, it's good fun, the newsletter, because you get to actually write exactly what you think.
I know, it's great. So that's all at fearandgreed.com.au, and it comes out every Wednesday. On with the show, though, Sean. The main story this morning, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has launched the Future Made in Australia Act as the government pushes to boost its economic and national security credentials.
The Prime Minister said there is no choice but to try and mimic the clean energy and supply chain subsidies being offered by other nations, including there's the really big one from the US, the Inflation Reduction Act. A number of existing policies here locally will come under the new umbrella, including the $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund, the Critical Minerals Strategy, subsidies and incentives to help the manufacturing sector, and any new money in next month's budget. Speaking in Queensland, the PM said other countries are investing in their industrial base, their manufacturing capability and their economic sovereignty, and Australia needs to do so as well. He said putting money into certain sectors wasn't old-fashioned protectionism or isolationism, but rather it's new competition. Interesting spin. He said global economic circumstances are changing in ways that are more profound than the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic or conflict in Ukraine, and many countries, including the US, EU, Canada, Korea, Japan, are drawing greater links between their economic and national security.
Sean, it seems to be the week for big policy initiatives, doesn't it? Because we had the proposed changes to merger laws on Wednesday, and we discussed those at length yesterday. And now this, I suppose when you kind of have a bit of a poke around, is there anything new in it?
Oh, not really. Not yet anyway, though there probably will be things in the budget, one of which could be making it easier for foreign investors to put their money in Australia. Mostly yesterday was bringing together already announced policies under what the Prime Minister has previously called the Future Made in Australia pillar. Now, it's one of the 4 pillars that the government's talking about, the others being addressing the cost of living, safeguarding Medicare, and establishing for Australia a leading role on the world stage. Now, if you think of that cost of living, Medicare, world stage, Anthony Albanese spent a bit of time on those. This is the 4th pillar, the Future Made in Australia pillar, and that's what yesterday was really about. What the COVID pandemic did do was make us more aware of global supply chain shortcomings and the need to boost local manufacturing. That awareness has morphed, not just in Australia, but globally, into a rethink about investing and how the economy can play a role, particularly around defence and national security. And that's really what yesterday was all about.
All right. How did local markets perform?
The S&P ASX 200 closed down nearly 0.5% to 7,813 points, though the benchmark was down 1% plus in early trading. Now, that followed higher than expected inflation data out of the US. Interest rate sensitive stocks, including technology, healthcare, consumer discretionary and financials, were sold off, while the energy sector rose after the price of Brent crude pushed back above $90 a barrel. Gold stocks also did well. The Commonwealth Bank and ANZ both fell more than 1%, leading the banks lower. CSL was off 1.1%, leading the healthcare stocks down. REA, James Hardie Industries and Wesfarmers were among the worst performers of the large caps. Big miners ended higher, as did Woolies, Woodside and Santos.
Now, checking international markets thanks to Blue Chip Communication, the experts helping financial services companies market, communicate and grow. Visit bluechipcommunication.com.au. Bit of news out of the US, Sean.
Yeah, big news. Higher than expected inflation figures in the United States have dampened expectations of rate cuts in the world's biggest economy this year. Overall, inflation accelerated to 3.5% in the 12 months to March, while core inflation, which excludes volatile food and energy categories, was higher than expected at 3.8%. Some of the core readings for services, stuff like rent, insurance, they remain really high. And the figures that were released overnight Wednesday show just how difficult it is to get that last mile, that last bit of inflation down to get back into preferred target bands, that 2 to 3% band. The figures also triggered big moves in bond yields, with traders now pricing in 2 cuts by the Fed this year. Remember, at the beginning of the year, traders were pricing in 6 cuts, down to 2 cuts. Not real promising, that. The US economy tends to lead the Australian economy by around 6 months. Thus far, inflation locally has been trending in the right direction, lower, but the US data will give cause for concern to the Reserve Bank. The announcement in the US pushed the US dollar higher, sending other currencies, including the Aussie dollar, much lower. The Aussie fell as low as 65 US cents before recovering slightly. The news also triggered a sell-off on Wall Street, with major indices falling by around 1%. In total contrast, Michael, Chinese inflation figures were released yesterday. Consumer prices barely increased over the past year. They're up 0.1% in the world's second largest economy.
That's quite extraordinary, isn't it?
It's just total chalk and cheese.
Absolutely. All right, there is a bit to get through today, Sean. We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, supermarket giant Aldi appeared before a Senate committee yesterday and said it wants to open more stores, but finding the right locations alongside state and local planning rules are making things a bit difficult.
Yes, so Aldi currently has 600 stores across the country. It employs 16,000 people and it wants to push into new regions like Far North Queensland and Tasmania. Chief Executive Anna McGrath said the company has invested $7 billion in Australia so far, but there are still catchments within the major cities that Aldi just hasn't been able to penetrate. She also said she had not seen any evidence of land banking by Coles and Woolies. That's something the inquiry is considering.
Yeah, land banking is becoming a major issue in the Senate inquiry into supermarkets. And in contrast to Aldi, Metcash has let fly at Woolworths and Coles, accusing them of using their financial muscle and market power to scoop up land, properties and shopping centres and shut out competition.
Yes, the head of supermarkets for Metcash, Grant Ramage, provided a real-world example of land banking, or what he alleges is land banking, which saw a popular and successful independent supermarket in Brighton, South Australia, almost lose its store after Coles made a play to buy the site. This is according to a story in The Australian. Mr. Ramage claims Metcash was forced to step in and purchase a property in Adelaide to stop Coles buying it and possibly throwing out the independent supermarket operating at that site. Metcash was also forced to match an inflated price to keep Coles from grabbing it, according to Mr. Ramage's claims. Metcash then sold the property to an independent supermarket operator at a lower price, taking a loss on the deal.
Wow. Now, NextDC, Sean, is the country's largest listed developer and operator of data centres, and they're raising $1.3 billion from investors to expand amid the surge in demand for cloud computing services and the AI boom.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting little story, this one. NextDC's share price has been among the best performing stocks this year. It's up about 21%, mostly because it serves a boom part of the economy. Data centers are the essential infrastructure for cloud computing, for AI, all that sort of stuff. So important that NextDC needs to expand. Yesterday, the group brought forward capital raising plans, saying it needs to develop centres in Sydney and Melbourne to meet demand. It already operates 13 data centres. It's got another 9 in development, including one in Malaysia and one in New Zealand. That's pretty good growth.
Yeah, it certainly is. Now, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says comments from US President Joe Biden about the prosecution or otherwise of Julian Assange are encouraging.
The US president was asked for his response to Australian requests to end the US government's pursuit of the WikiLeaks founder. Mr. Biden said, "We are considering it." That's actually an improvement on previous, more hardline comments. US prosecutors want to try Assange on 18 counts, mainly under the Espionage Act, over WikiLeaks' release of 2010 confidential US military records and diplomatic cables. Mr. Albanese told the ABC that the president's response was a positive sign in the campaign to get the charges against Assange dropped. And while talking about this, Joe Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida have agreed to start a new joint air defence strategy with Australia, in part to counter China's aggressive military threats in the Pacific.
And so this is all alongside all of the AUKUS and JAUKUS conversations, right?
The AUKUS, JAUKUS. Yep, that's right.
Goodness me, it's hard to keep up at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I've got more coming later in the show. It is very hard to keep up.
Okay, I will stand by. Gold Digger, Northern Star, says it will need to spend... Always feels like you're making a value judgment there when you call someone a gold digger, doesn't it?
No, that's what they do. They dig for gold.
Yeah, I know, but it feels like it's kind of...
We are trying to grab the phrase back from the Kanyes of the world. We are trying to give it the true meaning.
Anyway, Gold Digger Northern Star says it will need to spend more cash than expected to get gold out of the ground at its mines in Australia and the United States, but that didn't stop its share price from jumping more than 2%.
And this is a cool little story because I get to explain something in it. So Northern Star's share price is up 20% in this past 6 weeks. It runs mines in Western Australia and Alaska. And yesterday it talked about something called its all-sustaining costs, with an S, all-sustaining costs. All-sustaining costs measures the full costs of mining gold. Now, that's obviously equipment, it's wages, it's also, the cost of general office spending.
So like tea and coffee in the lunchroom.
Yeah, the whole bit. And so what they're talking about is the all-sustaining costs is going to jump $130 per ounce of gold, which means it'll go to $1,835 per ounce. That compares to a price of gold of $23.40 an ounce. So the gap, which if my maths is correct, is going to be $4,505. That's its profit margin. So basically $1,835 per ounce, all sustaining costs versus $23.40 an ounce. Price of gold is forecast to stay elevated as investors flee to safe haven assets amid geopolitical upheaval. That's kind of why investors bought Northern Star yesterday.
All sustaining costs.
There you go.
All right, turning to international news. The US and Japan have unveiled plans to, quote, enable seamless integration of military operations between the two countries following a meeting in Washington between President Joe Biden and Prime Minister Fumio Kishida.
The visit underscores Japan's importance as a key ally in countering China. The two leaders announced a list of initiatives aimed at boosting defence and intelligence cooperation, with projects ranging from missiles to moon landings, including the goal of making a Japanese astronaut the first non-American to set foot on the moon, according to Bloomberg. The move... Oh, I know you're excited. Just love anything to do with the moon.
You saw me sit up as soon as you said moon landings. I opened my eyes. Not that I wasn't resting. I was concentrating with my eyes closed.
Yeah.
But as soon as you said moon landings, I'm like, you got me now, Sean.
Yeah, well, Japanese astronaut apparently.
If you were striking a deal with, say, the US, as if you wouldn't put kind of moon landings in there as a condition.
You would, wouldn't you? You just throw it in.
Yeah, you're just like, hey, let's ask for this. It's like when you're negotiating a new contract.
Yeah.
Just ask for it and see what they say. The worst they can say is no. They're like sitting down in the meeting and they're like, look, we've got one more thing we want to put on the list if we can. We'd like a Japanese astronaut to land on the moon. Like, oh, okay, fine.
Righto. There is one spot going. Righto.
Yeah,
in you go.
It's yours. Sorry, I've derailed you.
Anyway, the meeting comes amid growing concerns over Beijing, with President Biden and Prime Minister Kishida condemning China's dangerous actions in the region, dangerous being their word. The two also held an unprecedented trilateral summit with Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. overnight. This, of course, is where the discussion about the defence agreement with Australia came into it, Michael. So that's the new joint air defence strategy with Australia and those two countries. There seems to be pacts and strategies and defence force cooperatives and all sorts of things left, right and centre.
Now, American intelligence agencies believe that Iran or one of its proxy groups in the Middle East will launch an attack on Israel imminently, according to media reports. This is a tad alarming.
Tehran is said to be planning a major reprisal for Israel's strike on Damascus earlier this month when a number of leading members of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps were killed. Any attack could lead to a major escalation in the region. Officials claimed that an attack by Iran was seen more as a matter of when rather than if, according to Bloomberg. Israeli officials say they are preparing for an unprecedented direct attack from Iranian soil using ballistic missiles, drones and cruise missiles against Israeli targets. Meanwhile, Israel's strikes on the Gaza Strip continue with 3 sons of a major Hamas political leader killed over the past 48 hours.
Finally, Sean, I'm sure you love this story, wouldn't you? Track and field is set to become the first sport to introduce prize money at the Olympics later this year, with World Athletics saying it will pay $50,000 to gold medalists in Paris.
It's a break with the amateur pass to the Olympics in some of the game's most watched events. $2.4 million is being set aside to pay the gold medalists across the 48 men's, women's and mixed events on the track and field program for this year's Paris Olympics. Relay teams will split the $50,000 between their members. Payments for silver and bronze medalists are planned to start from the 2028 Olympics in Los Angeles, according to Associated Press. The prize money will come out of the share of Olympic revenue that the ISC distributes to World Athletics. Good on World Athletics for paying some of these great athletes at the Olympics.
That's a nice feel-good story to finish on, isn't it?
It is. I agree.
All right, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. You're talking today with Nicola Powell, Head of Research at Domain.
A little bit less feel-good, all about rents being at record levels for houses and units, but the feel-good part of it is that Nicola has some good news about the next 6 to 12 months.
Yeah, it's a really good interview. It's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Friday, the 12th of April, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast and join us online on LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson and that was Fear and Greed. Have a great day.